case of Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces. What led to the crime against the pregnant woman and what became of the child? The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries or even the other side of the world in these pursuits. But sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of two left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. However, the woman never returned home. Fragments of her disfigured and unrecognizable body were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone Gorces had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala. Little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces. She was born on April 13, 1991 in a small village named Granados in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia Gorces, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children and did not provide any financial support. Decision to relocate. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. Let's continue. The family barely had enough money for essentials, and something had to change. In 2013, Nancy's older sister immigrated to the United States, where she soon found a good job, married successfully, and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, Gorces worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few €1,000, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities, and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. Fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andres Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Gorses was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's two younger brothers had also moved to Spain with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which he tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being Gorses was openly doubting whether to continue her life with this man when she discovered she was pregnant. Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on, their life would change for the better. But in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device on talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Gorse ominously stated that if anything happened to her or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice. Mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th around 2 in the afternoon, Nancy text messaged to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to the hospital, he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos's phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report. And on top of everything else, he too stopped communicating with the Gorses family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, Her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos Police Station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts of Carlos. She shared with the officers what she had already told the girls' brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. In the message, Nancy pleaded with Sandra never to give her son money regardless of the tearful stories he might concoct. According to Gorses, he would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation. But later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships, the oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning. But in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially, he was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother, he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries. In a rented apartment for nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch, but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim discoveries in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing, but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with what happened, stating they had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos' version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos' movements from August 20th to the 26th using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, so once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gorseys, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements, and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorseys, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of €150,000 to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman. Drew Katrina Shayadun was born September 26, 1981 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was the younger of 2 children to her parents, Alan and Linda. When Drew was 3 years old, her parents divorced but kept their friendship. From age 10, she and her brother Sven were raised by Linda and her second husband Sid Walker, a travel agent in a comfortable home on Whitefish Lake, renowned as one of Minnesota's most scenic vacation spots. Drew blossomed in high school, becoming an honor student, joining the golf team, and getting elected homecoming queen in 1999. But her real passion was for art. Her room at home was filled with her sketches of rock stars, models, and her friends. After graduating from high school, she went to the University of North Dakota Grand Forks, a city of about 50,000 people. Friends described Drew as a person in love with life and ready to lend a helping hand to everyone. She often traveled around the country, but her dream was to visit Australia, and Drew was going to go there in February. In preparation for the event to save up more money, Drew worked 2 jobs in her spare time, a sales associate at Victoria's Secret and a waitress at a nightclub in Grand Forks. On Saturday, November 22, 2003, Drew's shift at the Victoria's Secret store located in Columbia Mall ended at 4 p.m. Later that day, she was supposed to work at a nightclub. Before leaving the mall, Drew decided to go shopping and bought a purse from a certain store. She called her boyfriend, Chris Lane, as she made her way to her car in the parking lot. Suddenly, after Drew said, okay, the call was disconnected, but Chris didn't give it much thought. There was nothing important they were discussing, and so he didn't call back. About 3 hours later, Chris's phone rang again, and it was Drew calling. When he answered it, all he heard was a noise like the sound of the wind and the sound of buttons being pressed on the phone. 3 weeks later, in an interview on a television station, Chris recounted the thoughts that flashed through his mind when his conversation with Drew was interrupted. I did not know the sense of urgency of this phone call at the time, he said. I never in a million years dreamt that this was happening. There was no sense of urgency, more just a cell phone call being cut off for any number of reasons. Honestly, I had no idea that this terrible thing was happening. Drew was living in a college dorm where she shared a room with a friend named Meg Murphy. About the same time Chris received a strange phone call, Meg received a call from the nightclub where they were trying to find out why Drew hadn't come to work and wasn't answering the phone. She was a responsible employee and always came to work early, so her absence immediately caused everyone's concern. However, Meg didn't know where Drew might be and was surprised that she hadn't shown up for work. Trying to find out where her friend Meg had disappeared, she first called mutual acquaintances and then called the local hospital where she was told that Drew had not been admitted there. Around 9 p.m., unable to find out anything, Meg called the police. Knowing that Drew worked at Columbia Mall, a police officer was dispatched there. At this point, the mall was already closed. Driving around the parking lot, the officer saw Drew's car. Upon examining it, he found that the car was unlocked. There were no signs of a struggle or any other crime. A black nylon sheath from a folding knife was found on the ground near the car. It wasn't clear yet whether it had anything to do with Drew's disappearance, but such a find was not encouraging. On the seat in the car were papers, a wallet, and a new purse purchased that day, suggesting that even if Drew had faced some dirty deed, it certainly hadn't been a robbery. Neither friends, boyfriend, nor parents knew where Drew might be, so investigators began to lean toward the theory that they were dealing with a kidnapping. First of all, detectives checked out Chris Lang. He was almost immediately ruled out as a suspect because he was in Minnesota, 300 miles from Grand Forks. From Chris, the police learned about the 2 phone calls Drew had made, that one had been abruptly interrupted, and that during the second, made a few hours later, wind noises and the sound of button pressing could be heard. The next day, when the mall where Drew worked opened, the detectives arrived there to review the security camera footage. As it turned out, there were no security cameras in the parking lot where the missing girl's car was parked. But fortunately, there were quite a few security cameras inside the mall. Going through the footage, detectives found a moment when Drew went into one of the local stores after work where she bought herself a purse. She was calm and in no hurry to go anywhere. She was wearing a pink sweater and was holding a jacket. At 4:55 p.m., Drew paid for her purchase at the register, then put on her jacket and left the store. On her way out, she called Chris. The call was made at exactly 5 p.m., and as we now know, at 5:04 p.m., the conversation between Drew and Chris was abruptly interrupted after she said, Okay. Knowing that the call was interrupted after 4 minutes, one of the detectives decided to conduct an experiment. Setting the timer for 4 minutes, he began walking slowly from the store where Drew had bought her purse to the parking lot where her car was parked. When the alarm sounded indicating that 4 minutes had passed, there was in the parking lot near where the car had been found. This indicated that something had happened while Drew was at her car. However, as mentioned earlier, there were no cameras overlooking the parking lot, and that made it difficult to investigate. Drew's disappearance attracted media attention, and as a result, a huge number of people learned about what had happened to her, many of whom decided not to remain indifferent to someone else's misfortune. In addition to police officers, over 1,000 volunteers participated in the search for Drew. FBI officers also joined the investigation. The last call that was made from Drew's phone was traced to the small town of Fisher in neighboring Minnesota, which is only a 30-minute drive from the mall where she worked. As you can see on the map, the area around these two towns is occupied by fields. Police used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, horses, and dogs to explore these fields. The landowners were asked to check their properties themselves, but unfortunately, this was inconclusive. And at first, no leads could be found. The search radius increased with each new day, and 4 days later, an ominous discovery was made. A boot was found under a bridge in the town of Crookston. A roommate noted that on the day of her disappearance, Drew had left the house wearing those boots. Later, the fact that the shoe belonged to the missing girl was confirmed by forensics. Crookston is a small town of less than 10,000 people. It is located about 30 miles from Grand Forks, where Drew disappeared from. Further searches in the Crookston area yielded no results, as there was nothing of investigative interest to be found. A reward of $20,000 was initially offered for information that would help to determine Drew's whereabouts, and then the reward was increased to $140,000. At this point, the only clue that could lead to Drew was the surveillance footage at Columbia Mall. The detectives again sat down to watch hundreds of hours of footage from various cameras, but this time, they decided to focus their attention not on Drew. They speculated that whoever abducted her may have been following her and may also have been on the videos. The investigators spent hours at the monitors before they saw the person who had caught their attention. They noticed a man walking aimlessly around the mall. He was not buying anything and seemed to be looking more at the people around him than at the merchandise being sold. At 3:41 p.m., he sat down on a bench near the mall exit and continued to watch people casually walk past him. After about 10 minutes, he got up from the bench and, wearing black gloves on his hands, walked out into the lobby where there was a camera hanging overhead, into which he looked. This shot was taken 72 minutes before Drew's conversation with her boyfriend was interrupted, and she disappeared. After watching the man get up from his seat and walk away, investigators noticed that he only did so when a blonde woman walked past him carrying a grocery cart heading in the direction of the parking lot. Detectives did not consider this a coincidence. Rather, in their opinion, the man seemed to have chosen a suitable victim and followed her. The identity of this woman was unknown, but police were aware that only one person, Drew Shoden, had disappeared from the mall parking lot that day. Given the slight resemblance between Drew and the woman this suspicious man was following, it has been suggested that he had a particular image of the victim. If the kidnapper really was this man, and if for some reason he had failed to kidnap this woman, his next target might have been Drew. She had left the mall around 5 p.m., a time when it was already dark, which might have played into the hands of the perpetrator. At this point in the investigation, there were 3 cities in the case: Grand Forks, where Drew was kidnapped; Fisher, where her phone was last active; and Crookston, where the shoe was found. With this data in mind, the FBI began checking the files of all registered sex offenders from these cities and their environs. Comparing the photos from the files with the image of the suspicious man from the mall, there was only one man who matched all the parameters, and that was Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., who had an extensive criminal history of repeated crimes against women. The 50-year-old man had spent the last 23 years behind bars. Rodriguez was the second oldest of 5 children born in Laredo, Texas in February 1953 to migrant workers Dolores and Alfonso Rodriguez Sr. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. claimed to have had an unhappy childhood, describing his home life as unpleasant because his parents were highly critical of him and unreasonable in their demands. His family moved from state to state for 15 years until they finally settled in Crookston in 1963. Rodriguez became increasingly isolated while growing up, which was further compounded by language barriers. His preferred language was Spanish, and he struggled with English, which made school especially challenging. He eventually dropped out of school during the 9th grade and began working as a laborer at the American Crystal Sugar Company plant in Crookston. Rodriguez claimed that he was molested by older women during his youth, which he said was the source of his hostile feelings against women. In October 1974, at the age of 21, he asked a woman for a ride home, but instead directed her to the driveway in Crookston, where he grabbed her by the throat and tried to force her to please him. The next month, he approached another woman who was sitting in a truck outside of a Crookston movie theater. He threatened her with a knife and ordered her to a secluded spot in the countryside where he forced her to have intercourse with him. Then in 1979, he tried to kidnap a 69-year-old high school English teacher while she was out walking one night in Crookston. The woman fought back as Rodriguez tried to force her into his car. In a fit of anger, he stabbed her with a knife in her elbow and abdomen, yet she managed to break free and run to safety. The woman, who was artistically talented, was able to draw a composite sketch of Rodriguez that closely resembled him and led to his capture. He was convicted of attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault and sent to prison for 23 years until his release in May 2003. He had been released from prison 6 months before Drew disappeared and was registered as a sex offender of the highest 3rd degree, which meant that his risk of reoffending was as high as possible. Before his release from prison, Rodriguez's family voiced their concerns to Minnesota Department of Corrections officials. Even his family feared that he was going back to his old ways. But despite their fears, Alfonso was released because he had served his entire sentence. After his release, Rodriguez lived with his mother in Crookston, just a couple of miles from the bridge where, it should be recalled, Drew's shoe had been found, which was another factor not in his favor. The detectives decided to talk to Alfonso Rodriguez, and of course, he denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance. The man confirmed that he had been at the Columbia Mall the day she disappeared, saying that he had gone to the movie theater and watched the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico. What he didn't consider was that none of the movie theaters in Grand Forks were showing the movie that day. Police searched Rodriguez's car and realized with regret that Drew was probably no longer alive. It looks at this time like there's no chance we're going to find Drew alive, Grand Forks County Sheriff Dan Hill told reporters. I believe that it is more of a recovery than a rescue mission at this point in time. In Rodriguez's car, dark red dried stains were found in several places in the interior, which forensics later determined were drops of Drew's blood. The affidavit says blood was found on the passenger side rear window and in the back seat, as well as 2 other areas in the passenger compartment. The blood did come back. It was a DNA match with Drew from the DNA taken from Drew's toothbrush, the sheriff said. A folding knife was found in the trunk, which matched the sheath found in the parking lot next to Drew's car. A receipt was also found indicating that Rodriguez had purchased this knife complete with its sheath from a hardware store located several hundred yards from the parking lot where Drew disappeared. Although Drew was not found alive or dead, investigators gathered enough evidence to charge Rodriguez. 8 days after she disappeared, on December 1, 2003, the man was arrested. Rodriguez, who was imprisoned in a Grand Forks jail, claimed that he was not involved in Drew's disappearance and refused to speak to law enforcement officials or provide information as to her whereabouts despite the evidence against him. During a brief bond hearing several days earlier, bail for Rodriguez's release was set at a staggering $5 million. While he remained silent in custody, the search for Drew continued unabated and focused around these 3 towns. The work of the searchers was made more difficult by the snow that covered the area abundantly. In an unprecedented move, the governors of North Dakota and Minnesota pledged during a December 9th press conference to aid in the search for Drew by employing several hundred members of the National Guard and other state employees. North Dakota Governor John Hovind said that Drew's disappearance was something that has touched every North Dakotan. Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty told reporters that he was very proud of the cooperation and the collaboration that's been exhibited by members of the community and police officials. Despite all the efforts made, there were no results. And due to worsening weather conditions, the authorities decided to suspend the search operation. In spring, the intensive search continued. Those searching for Drew hoped they would be able to find her as the winter snow had just begun to melt. After 5 long months of searching, they were eager to return Drew home. Finally, on April 17, 2004, Drew's body was found. It lay in a field in Crookston, just a few miles from the bridge under which the boot had been found. Drew's family was overwhelmed with grief upon hearing of the heart-wrenching discovery. Her father told reporters, "We were waiting for that call, and when that call came, we all stopped living for a second. It was her parents' worst nightmare and one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives." The field where the body was found had already been searched, but apparently because of the large drifts, they could not find it immediately. Drew was naked below the waist, which made the motive of the crime obvious. Her hands were tied behind her back, and there was a rope around her neck and a cut. Under the rope were the remnants of a plastic bag indicating that the bag had first been put over Drew's head and then tied around her neck with a rope. Hair matching Rodriguez's DNA was found on Drew's jacket. Before she died, the young woman had been brutally beaten and stabbed repeatedly. The medical examiner listed 3 possible causes of her death. It was either the cut on her neck, suffocation, or the third possible cause, which was hypothermia. On April 24, 2004, after many months without a word, Drew's family was able to say goodbye to her. About 1,500 people attended the mourning ceremony. North Dakota, where Drew was kidnapped, abolished the death penalty back in 1975. Minnesota, where the body was found, did not use the death penalty as a punishment either. However, because Drew had been transported across state lines, the crime was considered a federal crime, and therefore the prosecutor's office had the right to seek the death penalty for Rodriguez. On August 30, 2006, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was convicted in the Drew Shirodin case. The jury recommended that he be sentenced to death. On February 8, 2007, Judge Ralph Erickson, during the hearing, told the unconfessing Rodriguez that his senseless and violent actions caused the jury and the court to make a difficult decision. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. became the first person sentenced to death in the state of North Dakota in nearly a century. After 6 years on death row, on June 28, 2013, Rodriguez confessed that he was the one who kidnapped and took Drew's life. However, the story doesn't end there. Ralph Erickson, who had previously been the district judge who sentenced Rodriguez to death, became a U.S. Court of Appeals judge, and it was he who in 2021 overturned his own conviction of Rodriguez and ordered a new sentencing phase. Rodriguez's guilt is not in doubt and has been confirmed by various types of DNA testing. In this case, it is the death penalty that is at issue. Erickson overturned the death sentence, citing among other things, the failure of defense attorneys to properly examine Rodriguez's mental health and the testimony of forensic expert Michael McGee, which the judge himself said misled him. This is the expert's testimony, which stated at the time that Rodriguez violated Drew's sexual integrity within 24 to 36 hours of the abduction. The fact is that there was no direct evidence to support this, such as Rodriguez's seminal fluid on Drew's body. According to the judge, the expert gave his opinion, but it was not supported by the facts, which misled the judge and influenced his verdict. Still, in reversing the death sentence, Erickson noted that even without the presence of Rodriguez's seminal fluid, the circumstances in which Drew's body was found, naked below the waist with her hands tied behind her back, were indicative of a sexually motivated crime. Judge Erickson said that the failure to examine Rodriguez's mental health, both generally and at the time of his crime, was a violation of his constitutional rights. After Rodriguez's death sentence was overturned, the federal prosecutor's office issued a statement saying they would seek the death penalty for him again. However, 2 years later, in 2023, the prosecutors abandoned those plans and accepted that Alfonso Rodriguez's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A statement to that effect was issued, which said, "The United States of America by Max Schneider, United States Attorney for the District of North Dakota, hereby withdraws the notice of intent to seek a sentence of death against defendant Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., filed on October 28, 2004, Schneider wrote in a March 14 court filing, "The United States no longer intends to seek the death penalty in this case. My thoughts today are with Drew Shirodin's family, particularly her parents, Linda Walker and Alan Shoden, said Schneider. They are genuinely good people and loving parents who, in the wake of an unimaginable loss, have worked closely with our office for nearly 20 years. We continue to wish them the greatest measure of peace possible. I also want to commend the trial team, including former United States Attorney Drew Wrigley, as well as our office's appellate attorneys and support staff. Over the last 2 decades, they have continuously upheld the high standards of the Department of Justice through their work on this tragic case. As a result of their efforts, Mr. Rodriguez is and will remain a convicted murderer. The directive to withdraw the death notice has changed how the United States Attorney's Office will proceed with this case. What will not change is that Mr. Rodriguez will draw his last breath in a federal prison. This case led to changes in sex offender registration laws. On July 27, 2006, President George Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, which included Drew's Law. Drew's Law changed the name of the National Sex Offender Public Registry to the Drew Shaidan National Sex Offender Public Website, which provides information to the public on the whereabouts of registered sex offenders, regardless of state, territory, or tribal boundaries. On June 22, 2013, news broke that Alfonso Rodriguez had been transferred from death row prison in Terre Haute, Indiana to Coleman II, a high-security penitentiary in Sumterville, Florida. This is where it looks like he will spend his last days. The case of Sinini and Taran. On October 23, 2018, in Bangalore, there was a customer service office for a company called Oracle situated on the 7th floor of a building. During this time, all the staff were working the night shift. It was approximately 11:45 p.m. when a security guard from the company approached an employee and informed him that 2 individuals were waiting to meet him in the waiting room. The employee pondered who could be visiting him around midnight, as none of his friends had ever done so before. A slight sense of fear crept into his mind. With some reluctance, he proceeded to the waiting room where the 2 individuals awaited him. Both men were tall. As he walks towards them, one of the men reaches out his hand and says, "Hello, Mr. Taran." Upon hearing the name Taran, the employee is surprised and starts trembling because he hadn't heard that name for almost 15 years. No one had called him Taran before today. His wife, children, and all his friends knew him by the name Praveen Badal. This man had hidden his identity from everyone. But today, after nearly 15 years, he hears this name from someone's mouth. While shaking hands with Tarun, the man noticed that one of his fingers was broken. He then informed Tarun that his game was up and that they would be taking him to his actual home. It turned out that the 2 men who had visited the company were actually police officers. Tarun was then taken to Ahmedabad on October 24, 2018. During this period, a police officer sent a brief message to a senior officer stating, "We have shown him." Tarun, still in disbelief, wondered how the police managed to capture him after 15 years. To understand what this man had done and why the police caught him, we will have to go 15 years back now. It is February 14, 2003 in Ahmedabad, where a husband named Tarun and his wife named Sinini lived. They were married 3 months ago in December 2002. Tarun worked as a sports teacher at a school, while Sinini worked at a bank. Tarun also coached volleyball. Their marriage was arranged, and they lived together in an apartment. Whenever Tarun had to go out for a volleyball match, he would tell his wife Sinini to not stay alone in the apartment. He would advise her that there are often thefts in the area, so she should go to her father's house instead. Sinini's father's house was not far from their apartment, so whenever Tarun had a match, Sinini would go to her father's house. On February 5, 2003, Sinini went to her father's house for the last time. While leaving, she told her father that she needed some money to fill up the gas in the car. Her father, surprised, asked her if her son-in-law Tarun was taking care of her properly. Sinini seemed very upset and replied that there was nothing like that. After saying this, she left the house. Her father found it strange. He felt that something might not be right between the 2, but he didn't take this matter too seriously, as small arguments often happen between husband and wife. On February 14, 2003, at around 7:30 p.m., Sinini had a 15-minute conversation with her elder sister on the phone. About 2 hours later, Taran called Sojini's father and urgently requested him to come to the hospital, as Sojini's condition had deteriorated. Upon arrival at the hospital, the family discovered that Sojini had passed away. Tarun was seen crying in a corner. Sojini had died from strangulation with a scarf. Taran informed the police that jewelry and money had been stolen from their home, and all their belongings were scattered around. The police suspect that some thieves may have come to steal, and they may be responsible for Sojini's death. Taran was in a terrible state, crying uncontrollably, and his condition worsened due to his grief. As a result, he was unable to attend his wife's funeral. During this time, Taran was admitted to the hospital because his condition was deteriorating, and his family was providing him with emotional support. Simultaneously, the police were compiling a list of all the thieves in the area. 2 days later, on February 16, 2003, Tarun's elder brother's phone call reaches the police, informing them that Tarun has escaped from the hospital. Hearing this news, the police are shocked, as they had believed Taran was entirely innocent and were sympathetic towards him, which is why he was admitted to the hospital in the first place. However, now he had disappeared from the hospital, raising suspicions. Following this particular event, both the authorities and Sojini's relatives began to probe into the reasons behind Taran's permitted departure. The situation had sparked significant interest from the media, thereby intensifying the pressure on law enforcement to diligently pursue Tarun. Meanwhile, Tarun's family found themselves detained by the authorities temporarily, although they were subsequently released within a short span, given their lack of association with the incident. Tarun had been residing in an apartment with his wife, in isolation from the rest of his kin. The city police embarked on a relentless pursuit of Tarun, setting up roadblocks in multiple locations, yet failing to uncover any hint of his whereabouts. Sojini's relatives had applied significant influence on the authorities, prompting them to offer a substantial reward of 1 lakh rupees for details regarding Taran. Despite this attractive offer, the result was unsuccessful, making the police's efforts fruitless and pointless. Later, the police discovered that Taran had been harassing Sojini since their marriage because he was involved in an affair with another girl. The police gradually traced the girl, who informed them that on February 16th, Tarun had called her and proposed marriage. However, by that time, she had already received news of Sojini's death and outright refused Taran's proposal, stating that she couldn't marry someone involved in a murder. After that, there was no further contact between Taran and the girl. Slowly, 6 years passed since the incident, and there was no news of Taran from the police. The police had kept a close eye on Taran's family, expecting him to return or make contact, but Tarun never came to meet his family during this period. Subsequently, the police learned that exactly 6 years after this incident, Tarun met his parents in another state. Just 1 day after meeting Tarun, his father passed away. The police assumed that Tarun would now return to see his father one last time, but they were wrong, as Tarun did not come to see his father for the last time. Over the years, the police gradually slowed down their investigation. In 2016, a new officer joined the police department and, upon reviewing the case file, inquired about the updates. The police informed him that Tarun's father had passed away and his mother remained mostly ill, residing in Madhya Pradesh, while his other son, Tarun's brother, lived in Ahmedabad. However, there was still no information about Tarun. The police undertook a meticulous investigation, disguising themselves in unobtrusive attire and meticulously surveilled Taran's mother's residence, vigilantly monitoring any potential visitors or callers. Despite their diligent efforts, the investigation yielded no tangible leads or breakthroughs. Undeterred, the authorities proceeded to contact the young woman with whom Tarun had been romantically involved. She disclosed that she had not been in communication with Tarun since their last encounter. Nonetheless, some of Tarun's close acquaintances had recently informed her that they had spotted an individual bearing a striking resemblance to Tarun at a shopping mall located in the heart of Delhi. The police subsequently established a dedicated task force that embarked upon an expedition to Delhi, where they meticulously scrutinized all the closed-circuit television cameras installed within the mall. But unfortunately, they failed to uncover any evidence or indication of Tarun's whereabouts. In the aftermath of this endeavor, a series of purported sightings of Tarun emerged from various states, which reinforced the police's conviction that Tarun was indeed alive. Consequently, the police undertook a thorough examination of approximately 4,000 mobile phone numbers linked to Tarun's family members and his entire social circle, operating under the assumption that they might stumble upon a crucial lead that would ultimately guide them to Tarun's location. Throughout this ordeal, the police remained steadfast in their determination, firmly believing that eventually, some tangible clue would surface, which would ultimately facilitate their quest to locate Tarun. And they refused to relinquish hope, undeterred by the numerous setbacks and challenges they faced. The police were tracing Tarun's mother's phone and monitoring all her calls, trying to identify the people she was talking to. Despite their efforts, the police had not found any substantial leads yet, but they were hopeful that Tarun might make some mistake that would lead to his capture one day. A call was received on Tarun's mother's mobile phone originating from a landline number located in the renowned city of Bangalore, often described as the Silicon Valley of India. This vibrant metropolis attracts individuals from all corners of the country and beyond, drawn by the abundance of employment opportunities, particularly in the technology sector. The call was traced back to a customer care service department of an Oracle company based in Bangalore, prompting the police to investigate the potential significance of this connection and its relevance to Tarun's mother's involvement with the Oracle organization. After a lengthy investigation, the police were able to gather some relevant, albeit modest information about the case. With this connection as a starting point, a police team moved from Ahmedabad to Bangalore, hoping to obtain more clues. The police suspected that Taran might be working at Oracle, a major technology company located in the city. Subsequently, on October 22, 2018, the police went to Bangalore and met with the HR department of the Oracle company. They requested details of all the employees without disclosing the fact that they were looking for a specific person. The police stated that they needed the employee list to maintain law and order, and the HR department complied. The police were aware that if anyone got wind of their arrival, Tarun would escape and they would lose their lead. Therefore, the police were extremely cautious. The list that the police had did not contain the name Tarun. The police started to believe that their efforts were in vain. However, one name on the list seemed familiar to the police, Parvin Patelli. Later, the police remembered that Tarun's mother had occasionally spoken to a man named Parvin Patelli and had conversations with his wife, Nisha. Based on this, the police started gathering information about Pavan Patel and Nisha. The police discovered that Pavan and Nisha were not active on social media, which surprised the police because in today's time, almost everyone shares their pictures on social media. Moreover, the police knew that Tarun's mother frequently talked to Parvin Patel. In addition, Parvin and Nisha had 2 children. The police started to suspect whether Pavan Patel could be Tarun himself. Therefore, the police began gathering evidence against him. The police knew that when Tarun was a volleyball coach in school, one of his fingers, on which people often wear a ring, had a broken and slightly bent. On October 23rd, 2 police officers went to the Oracle company's customer care office in Bangalore. Later, a receptionist informed Parvin Patel that 2 people were there to meet him. When one of them, an officer, shook hands with Pavan, he recognized Tarun from the broken finger and said, "Tarun, your game is over." Upon hearing the name Tarun, Parvin's condition worsened. Tarun was caught due to a landline number. On that day, Tarun's mobile phone was not working, and he was worried about his mother. Therefore, he accidentally dialed his office's landline number to contact his mother, which turned out to be his biggest mistake. If Tarun had not called from the landline number, perhaps he would never have been caught. Later, the police also discovered that Tarun's mother had another mobile phone registered in the name of a distant relative, and he mostly spoke to his mother on that number, which the police had not traced. After that, the police brought Tarun back to Ahmedabad, where he admitted his mistake and confessed that he was the one who killed his wife. He then told the police the entire story after the murder. Tarun went to his friend proposing marriage, but his friend rejected him. Subsequently, he went to Pune, where he started a small job, and there he met Nisha. He had told Nisha that he was an orphan with no one in this world, and that's where their friendship blossomed. They eventually got married, and both of them arrived in Bangalore in February 2009, where Taran started working for the Oracle company. One surprising fact was that even Taran's wife knew that her husband's name was Parvin Patel. The police investigated this and found out that during school time, Taran had a friend named Parvin B. Taran revealed that after the murder, he stayed in Pune for a few days, and Parvin Patel also resided in Pune during that time. There, he spent some days with his friend, and during that period, he scanned all of his friend's ID proofs. While the name on the documents was Parvin B., he put his own picture and concealed his identity. Now his identity was established as Parvin B. This was the story of an individual who managed to outwit the police forces for a considerable period of 15 years, avoiding being discovered and captured. However, a small slip-up committed by this person ultimately became their downfall, resulting in their arrest after so much success in evading justice. The case of the Foster family. To what many perceived as the perfect family, no one expected that everything would quickly descend into disaster. On August 26, 2008, around 4 a.m., the Shropshire Central Fire Control received an emergency call about a fire at the Osbaston Mansion residence. When the firefighters arrived, they were hindered by a large horse box that blocked the entrance. By the time they managed to enter the residence, due to the initial difficulties, the fire had already consumed everything, including the owners, the Foster family. During the investigations, the police discovered that the horse trailer blocking the entrance had been deliberately parked there to delay the firefighters. This was not just an accident. Something more sinister was behind it. The question arose, who harbored animosity towards this beloved family, and who could be responsible for their tragic demise? The disturbing footage recovered by the investigators from the security cameras provided the answers they sought, but also sent chills down their spines. This is the shocking case of the Foster family. Christopher Foster, who was destined for success, was described by his mother Enid as a proactive achiever who sought opportunities for financial gain from a very young age. He shared aspirations with his younger brother Andrew Foster of emulating their late father, who was a sales director, as they both wanted to be successful businessmen. However, despite their common goal, Chris and Andrew's relationship had always been strained since childhood. Andrew later revealed the difficulties in their bond, attributing it to childhood dynamics. Chris, who was perceived as more confident and self-assured, cast a shadow over his quieter and less assertive brother Andrew. Both siblings, however, maintained a close relationship with their mother Enid, who cherished them both, though harboring a special fondness for Chris. In 1987, Chris married Jill, a housewife who later gave birth to their daughter and only child, Kirsty, in 1993. Chris's journey to wealth and success in the late 1980s began when he worked as a salesman selling mattresses and cheap pizza boxes for insulation. However, his life took a transformative turn when he witnessed a news report, leading him to establish a prosperous engineering company. This venture ultimately propelled him to self-made millionaire status, thanks to the development of a groundbreaking insulation material that would be widely utilized in the oil industry. As a result of what he saw on the news, the Piper Alpha oil rig explosion on July 6, 1988, which resulted in a devastating fire lasting for days and claiming 167 lives. Chris astutely seized this tragedy as an opportunity, identifying a market for fire-protected insulation tailored to gas and oil rigs. Although several oil companies expressed interest, they demanded proof of the product's efficacy before committing to any contracts. To meet this requirement, Chris took a significant financial risk by mortgaging his house for £5,000 to fund a testing. The successful test, where Ulva Shield, as he named it, displayed exceptional resilience compared to other oil rig insulations that burst into flames and even earned a rare one-fire test rate. Major oil corporations promptly placed orders, catapulting Christopher Foster into millionaire status almost overnight. Reports circulated that he was accumulating a substantial amount of money, which he did not know how to manage. As his business expanded, Christopher experienced a significant increase in annual turnover, soaring from £50,000 to £1 million, according to his personal assistant. It appeared that Chris was destined to spend a large sum of money. Although he allocated himself a monthly salary of £10,000, he was known to withdraw an additional £5,000 from the company's accounts for personal expenses. By February 2004, Chris's net worth was reported to be £10 million. During that same year, after a shopping trip, Chris and his wife, Jill, had returned home when Jill came across an exquisite mansion called Osbaston House while browsing through the pages of Shropshire Life magazine. This property, situated in the affluent village of Mebrooke in Shropshire, England, covered an area of 16 acres and featured a private lake and riding paddocks. Despite the asking price of around £1,500,000, the Fosters promptly made an offer and quickly sold their own home to move to Osbaston House. After settling in, Chris invested an additional £50,000 in installing a swimming pool and landscaping the property. He then indulged in a lavish lifestyle, acquiring various expensive vehicles, including Porsches and Aston Martin and Range Rovers. Their daughter, Kirsty, was enrolled in an exclusive private boarding school, and Chris also bought her several horses. Additionally, Chris purchased 4 dogs and several doves and hired a housekeeper and a personal assistant. The house was adorned with over £200,000 worth of antique furnishings, which became Chris's most expensive hobby. Chris was an avid gun enthusiast, owning numerous high-priced firearms ranging from £12,000 to $12,500 or almost $20,000 at the time. He frequently participated in extended shooting parties, sometimes lasting up to 3 days, which resulted in bills as high as £8,000. Chris also had a habit of leaving his guns scattered around his residence and would occasionally shoot doves, much to his wife Jill's dismay, as it caused a mess on his cars. In one disturbing incident, Chris took Kirsty's black Labrador, which was bothering the sheep, to a country lane and shot the dog in the head. Despite being a thriving entrepreneur, Chris was characterized as impulsive by acquaintances, exhibiting a desire for instant gratification and swiftly severing ties with those who displeased or went against him. He derived satisfaction from others admiring him and coveting his material wealth. And over time, both Chris and Jill ascended to higher social circles. Unbeknownst to those in his circle, Chris was significantly exceeding his financial limits and compensating by withdrawing funds from the business. His excessive spending resulted in a financial imbalance with more money going out than coming in. In February 2003, Chris signed an exclusive contract with a company called DRC, granting them sole rights to produce the oil rig sealant he had invented. By February 2004, his net worth had risen to £1 million. But a year later, in February 2005, he found himself burdened with £2,800,000 in debt. Instead of implementing cost-cutting measures, Chris, consumed by his spending addiction, tried to address the issue by seeking additional funds from alternative sources. He proceeded to sign a second contract with another company for the sale of his product, breaching the exclusivity agreement with DRC. This led to legal action with DRC ultimately suing Chris and acquiring his patent, which they then made a global success. Chris faced bankruptcy, and in February 2007, his company went into liquidation with £3 million worth of his assets frozen, and his salary ceased. Despite being in dire straits, Chris persisted in carrying on as if nothing significant was happening, and he even found himself in a dispute with his accountant who reported him to the Inland Revenue for tax evasion. He failed to pay V8, national insurance, and other taxes. To address the growing tax obligations, he resorted to borrowing from banks in an attempt to alleviate the financial strain. Furthermore, he remortgaged the Osbaston house 3 times and overdrew from more than 20 different bank accounts. Despite his outwardly lavish lifestyle and continuous spending, Chris managed to conceal the fact that he was deeply in debt. Over the following 12 months, he continued his hobby of clay pigeon shooting and maintained his use of extravagant cars. People who knew Jill were uncertain whether she was aware of the full extent of her husband's financial troubles, or if he had shielded her from the harsh reality. However, she did not show any signs of reducing her spending, and she did not share any concerns with her friends. Chris found himself grappling with overwhelming challenges, aware that time was slipping away and fearing the imminent loss of everything. During a conversation with a friend about houses, Chris emphatically stated that he would never part with Osbaston House unless it was in a body bag. He expressed a solemn commitment to safeguarding his family, vowing to take his own life rather than endure the loss of his loved ones or possessions. Struggling with the pressure to maintain his lavish lifestyle and aware that time and money were running out, Chris sought professional help on multiple occasions. He confided in his doctor, expressing feelings of depression and suicidal thoughts. He started taking antidepressants, but his doctor did not take his concerns about ending his life seriously. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, something unthinkable would happen in the week leading up to the August bank holiday weekend of February 2008. Chris stumbled upon a letter from his best friends attached to the front gate. The letter conveyed the unsettling news that his friends intended to return the following Tuesday to reclaim the house and other assets. When the housekeeper showed him the letter, Chris appeared perplexed, but remained silent. This letter would become the catalyst for the tragic events that unfolded later. The nightmare Chris had been evading was now becoming a harsh reality. Struggling with financial problems, he was on the verge of losing all his material possessions, and this impending ordeal was set to be known by everyone, something that he didn't really want. The thought of Kirsty and Jill, Chris's wife and daughter, losing their accustomed lifestyle proved unbearable for Christopher. Kirsty faced parting with her cherished horses, and the family had to face the likelihood of returning to their hometown of Wolverhampton, bidding farewell to their luxurious way of life. For a man of Chris's pride, such a situation would be deeply humiliating. On August 21, 2008, a friend reached out to Chris via text inquiring about his well-being, to which he responded, "Not good. Things are coming to a head for me soon." This communication was the only insight the friend received, unaware of the underlying financial troubles Chris was grappling with. On August 25, 2008, Chris received an invitation to attend a barbecue and pigeon shooting event. The 50-year-old man, accompanied by his 49-year-old wife and their 15-year-old daughter, then proceeded to join the gathering. None of the attendees noticed any signs of distress in Chris or the other two family members. Witnesses recall Chris appearing his usual cheerful self. And even in the photo captured during the event, the family exuded happiness, oblivious to what Chris had planned for later that night. In the previous week, Chris had closely examined suicide-related websites online and had spent the same afternoon reflecting on old family photographs that depicted happier times. Expressing his wish to leave the party, Chris informed his wife that he had had enough for the night. Although Jill preferred to stay a bit longer, they eventually departed around 8:30 p.m., arriving home just minutes later at 8:44 p.m. with their final moments as a family recorded by the home security footage. Shortly after Jill retired to bed at 11:30 p.m., Chris went upstairs to check on Kirsty, urging her to go to bed as she continued texting a friend online. Around midnight, Chris decided to turn off the internet, compelling Kirsty to conclude her conversation with her friend and retire for the night at 3 a.m. Chris set out to kill his first victim using a silenced gun. He entered the room where his sleeping wife lay unsuspecting and shot her in the back of the head. He then went to Kirsty's room and killed her in a similar manner. The home security cameras captured Chris as he took one of his shotguns and went outside to the dog kennels, where he shot each dog in the head. Chris then made his way to the barn housing the horses and repeated the same sinister act. Following this, he set the barn ablaze with all the animals inside. In the footage, Chris appeared methodical and almost robotic, lacking any expression or sign of remorse. To hinder the firefighters' access to the residence and their efforts to extinguish the fire on time, Chris took action. He drove a horse box and positioned it in front of the main entrance, shooting the tires to deliberately puncture them and make it harder to move. Subsequently, he strategically placed hose pipes connected to his domestic oil tank, pumping 200 lils of oil into the house's cellar. With his expertise in fire, Chris knew exactly what was needed to completely destroy the Osbastion house. His mental state seemed rooted in a desire for vengeance. If he couldn't retain his material possessions, then no one else should either. Chris then proceeded to set the house on fire, dousing his cars and other belongings with the flammable liquid as well. The fire quickly and violently consumed everything. Still armed with a rifle, Chris returned to the house and headed to the bedroom where Jill's lifeless body lay. There, he lay down beside her, embracing his deceased wife amid the flames that consumed everything. Chris's distant brother, Andrew, speculated that Chris might have wished for the fire to consume him as punishment for his actions that night. It was reported that Chris died due to smoke inhalation. The autopsy found no evidence of gunshot wounds, even though he had a rifle near him. At around 4:11 a.m., the security cameras had stopped working. A concerned neighbor called emergency services after seeing the flames growing. Firefighters quickly arrived at the residence, but were delayed by a horse box blocking the main gate. By the time they cleared the obstacle, the fire had already grown to an intensity that made it difficult to bring under control. As firefighters battled the raging blaze, neighbors watched in horror as the estate was consumed by flames, expressing deep concern for the now missing owners, the Fosters. In the subsequent days, newspapers and TV stations issued appeals to locate the family, but their efforts yielded no results given Chris's affluent status. Authorities initiated an investigation, initially suspecting a criminal abduction of the Foster family. At this point, however, neither the bodies nor the security camera footage had been discovered, and so many had speculated that this was what had happened to them. The arduous task of extinguishing the flames spanned 3 days. Finally, investigators cautiously entered the remnants of the house and discovered the intertwined remains of Jill and Christopher. Their bodies were bound together, laid on the bed in a room that had collapsed down to the living room area, where they were eventually found. However, there was no trace of Kirsty, amidst hopeful speculation that she might have escaped, while others feared the possibility of her abduction. A few days later, heartbreak ensued as small fragments of Kirsty's remains were discovered amidst the debris. Investigators, employing delicate precision, used brushes to gather Kirsty's remains into a waiting hearse. The discovery of a piece of Kirsty's skull revealed that tragically, she had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, just like the fate that had befallen her mother. Upon recovering and scrutinizing the bodies, the police directed their suspicions toward Chris as the likely perpetrator of the crimes. Concurrently, an investigation into his financial affairs was initiated. The deeper they delved, the more revelations unfolded about a prosperous businessman who was in reality submerged in insurmountable debt. To everyone's surprise, Chris's accumulated debts had amounted to £4 million. As creditors sought to claim his assets, they discovered that Chris had meticulously ensured there was nothing left for them. With the retrieval of security footage, the police confirmed their suspicions. Chris had carried out the murders and his own demise, leaving no note or indication of what he was going through. Speculation arose about the dark motives behind such a brutal crime, with the prevailing theory positing that Chris, consumed by shame over losing his fortune, opted for the heinous act to evade admitting his failures. Others suggested it was the defiant act of a self-centered man who chose to obliterate everything before facing the prospect of loss. Enid struggled with the distressing news, as did everyone else, but she adamantly rejected the notion that Chris could be capable of such actions. She staunchly defended him and harbored considerable sympathy for him, believing that Chris committed the acts out of love for his family, aiming to protect them from losing everything. However, Chris's brother Andrew held a contrasting viewpoint. Having not spoken for 16 years, there were fleeting thoughts of reconciliation for the sake of their mother. But fear restrained Andrew from going to his brother's house with apprehensive thoughts of encountering a potentially hostile situation. Andrew asserted that Chris bullied him during their childhood and had even allegedly sexually assaulted him. This tumultuous history led Andrew to maintain silence for the 16 years, according to him. Chris exhibited traits of a bully and control freak. In response to Andrew's 1999 letter, Chris replied with a note demanding a written apology, adding that Andrew would need to beg and scrape on bended knee to come to him and Jill. Andrew contended that Chris was unwilling to acknowledge his wrongdoings and instead harbored long-standing grudges. For months after the devastating tragedy on December 19, 2008, the funerals for 15-year-old Kirsty and 49-year-old Jill took place at their local village church. The joint funeral was silent and respectful, attended only by a small gathering of intimate friends and family. Both were laid to rest in the same plot. Following the wishes of Jill's family, Chris had a separate funeral and was interred away from Kirsty and Jill. In the years subsequent to the tragedy at the Osbaston house, remnants of the scorched structures and the family's charred belongings, including Kirsty's cherished first aid book for her horses, and even a handwritten note outlining what the family had planned to eat during that week of the tragedy, still lingered on the site. The once dream home, now reduced to crumbling ruins, persisted until 2011, when all debris was cleared. The 16-acre estate was eventually purchased in 2014, with plans formulated for the construction of a new 6-bedroom house. Although the property was put up for sale in 2012, it remained unsold until 2014, after the price was said to have been reduced. While the motives behind Christopher Foster's shocking deeds may have stemmed from financial struggles and the societal pressure to uphold an affluent and successful facade, it definitely shouldn't have taken such a horrific turn. Tragically, rather than making prudent financial decisions initially or later confiding in his loved ones about his financial woes, Chris chose a path of self-destruction with devastating consequences for all involved. As we reflect on this heartbreaking case, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind. The case of Jake Wagner. Hannah Mae Roden, 13, and Edward Jake Wagner, 18, met at a dance and quickly became lovers. As a result, the Roden and Wagner families began to spend time together, sharing weekends and parties, and Hannah Mae and Jake's love continued to grow. When Hannah Mae turned 15 years old, she revealed that she was pregnant. Jake was delighted with the news and hoped his family would be too. The Wagner family placed great emphasis on tradition in family lineage, and they adored children, viewing them as a continuation of their traditions. In fact, they often passed the name down from generation to generation, as seen in Jake's family, with his father being George Wagner III and his brother George Wagner IV. On the other hand, the Roden family had a more practical approach to family life. Even though they were divorced, Christopher Roden Sr. and Dana Roden remained close and devoted to their 3 children, prioritizing their happiness above all else. Unlike the Wagner family, the Rodens lived modestly, with Christopher working odd jobs and Dana as a nurse's assistant. Despite economic limitations, the Roden family instilled strong traditional values in their children, including Christopher Jr. and Clarence. The family was overjoyed when Hannah Mae gave birth to a daughter named Sophie, and they threw a big party. However, when Jake asked Hannah Mae to move in with him and his family, she refused. She became increasingly wary of Jake due to his increasingly controlling and aggressive behavior. Hannah Mae was initially attracted to Jake's caring and thoughtful nature, but over time, she realized that Jake was trying to limit her independence. Jake's aggression repeatedly caused Hannah Mae's feelings for him to cool. Her refusal to move in with Jake created tension with him. Jake believed that Hannah Mae was preventing Sophie from growing up in a safe and healthy environment. Despite Hannah Mae's denials, Jake became increasingly controlling. Hannah Mae finally ended the relationship in March 2015, tired of Jake's aggressive behavior. At that point, the Wagner family wanted sole custody of Sophie. Jake had to put in a lot of effort to convince Hannah Mae to sign over custody of the children to him and his brother. However, Hannah Mae refused. In a heated exchange, Jake angrily sent a text message saying that if necessary, he would use force to gain custody of Sophie. This revelation confirmed the Wagner family's willingness to use coercion and intimidation to achieve their goals. To protect herself and her daughter from this unscrupulous family, Hannah decided to distance herself and raise her child alone. She chose to work as a nursing assistant, continued her studies, and took care of Sophie herself. The situation escalated when Hannah became pregnant again. Although Hannah confirmed that the child was not Jake's, he still had doubts and tried to discover the truth. In December 2015, Jake logged into Hannah's social media accounts but found no evidence of an affair. A trial ensued, involving repeated interactions between the Wagner family and Hannah. In one text message, Hannah asserted that the Wagner family would have to get rid of her before they could gain custody of Sophie. Jake shared this letter with his family, angering them. His grandmother, Rita Newcomb, 65, retaliated by forging an important custody-related document. During the custody trial for Sophie, Christopher Roden and George Wagner III had a heated argument. This incident caused a complete rift in the relationship between the two families. The Wagner family soon came up with a terrible idea. They believed that Hannah Roden was uncooperative and decided that the only solution was to eliminate her and the entire Roden family in order to gain custody of Sophie. By Christmas 2016, this twisted idea was the start of a terrible crime. While everyone focused on love and celebration during the holiday season, the Wagner family had other intentions. They held a family vote to decide whether to continue with their evil plan or not. After everyone agreed, they assigned each person roles and began preparing. The Wagner family spent 5 months researching the Roden family home, including surveillance cameras, daily habits, and work schedules of each Roden family member. Each member of the Wagner family was assigned a specific task. Angela Wagner purchased a communications blocking device and planned to secretly install it on the Roden family's phone to prevent anyone from being able to contact the police. George Wagner III offered to build a homemade silencer and handle transportation the night of the crime, securing a truck and not attracting attention. Meanwhile, Sophie was safe at home with Angela because the court had awarded Hannah and Jake joint custody of Sophie. The Wagner family chose the time when it was their turn to care for Sophie in order to keep Sophie safe. It was clear that the Wagner family had meticulously planned every detail to carry out a perfect execution. At approximately 8 a.m. on April 22, 1936, George Wagner III visited Christopher Roden under the pretense of offering Christopher a job opportunity that could improve his family's financial situation. However, the job offer was just an excuse to get into the house. A moment later, Christopher Roden Sr. opened the door. A while later, as usual, Bobby Jo Manley arrived at Christopher's house to take care of the Roden family's animals. While outside the house, she noticed someone was inside, which was unusual for that time of day. Every member of the Roden family usually went about their work and was not at home. However, when she entered the house, she found Christopher and his cousin Gary, 38, lying in a pool of blood. Horrified, Bobby grabbed the phone and called emergency services, reporting what she had seen and asking for assistance. Still shaking, Bobby went to other relatives' houses and knocked loudly on one of their doors. A 3-year-old boy, the son of Clarence Frankie Roden, appeared, and Bobby asked him where his parents were. However, the boy did not respond but just pointed towards the bed. When she entered the house, she witnessed another horrifying scene. Clarence and his wife, Hannah Hazel, lay motionless. Lying between them was their 6-month-old baby, still alive but covered in the blood of Clarence and Hannah Hazel. After Bobby's 911 call, police quickly arrived on the scene. As the officers approached the Roden property, a neighbor intervened, sensing worried. He requested that the officers check 2 additional addresses of family members. His concern was justified, as police found bloodied bodies in the 3rd house. The victims were identified as Dana, 19-year-old Hannah May, and 16-year-old Christopher Jr. The attackers had spared Hannah's youngest child, a baby girl only a few days old. Later, another victim was discovered, 44-year-old Kenneth, the elder Roden's brother, who lived a 15-minute walk from the others. By 2 p.m., 8 victims had been identified: Christopher Sr., Dana, Clarence, Hannah Hazel, Christopher Jr., Hannah May, Kenneth, and Gary. The only survivors were young children, a 3-year-old, a 6-month-old, and a 4-day-old newborn, along with 2-year-old Sophie, who was at the Wagner home at the time of the incident. After examining the bodies, police concluded that all the victims had been killed in their sleep by gunshot wounds. Detectives later reconstructed the events of that day. Christopher Sr. was awake when the attackers burst into the house, as evidenced by a wound on his right arm. Christopher Sr. attempted to defend himself but was hit with 9 shots to the head, torso, and limbs. In addition, 5 bullets were removed from Dana Roden's neck and head. The rest of the family died from gunshot wounds to the head. Gary was shot 5 times, Christopher Jr. 4 times, Clarence and his wife Hannah Hazel 3 times each, and Hannah May twice. Kenneth was the only one shot once. In total, the assailant fired 32 shots, with some shots fired after the victims were already dead. Some bodies also showed signs of physical abuse. Since no one in the area heard anything, investigators believe the perpetrators used silencers, indicating a carefully planned and executed act. It was clear that the victims were targeted, and someone wanted revenge on the entire Roden family. During the search, police found 5 Remington shell casings of different types and an unused bullet from a different gun model. The scale of the case shows that this was a case with multiple murderers. Leonard Manley, Dana's father, claimed that the criminals must have known the family well, or the dogs would have been barking loudly. The question of who committed this act kept police officers busy. The Attorney General's office provided over $20,000 for the Roden family's funeral. Roden family were buried in several stages. On April 28, 2016, Gary was the first to be laid to rest in South Shore, Kentucky. Hannah Hazel's funeral followed on May 1st in the village of Atway, Coteau County, Ohio. The remaining members were buried on May 3rd in West Portsmouth, in the same county. Many local residents attended to pay their respects to the family. The surviving children were placed in the care of relatives. The neighborhood was gripped by fear. Police advised relatives of the victims to take precautions and warned all residents of Pike to stay their homes at night. The brutal mass murder outraged residents across the state, who demanded that the investigation's findings be made public and the perpetrators be caught as soon as possible. As part of the investigation, the murdered family's 3 homes had been investigated, followed by several more vehicles the following day. Forensic experts had participated in the investigation and had meticulously examined the homes, but no DNA evidence of the suspects had been found in any of the homes. Cameras had been installed in the houses, but they had not provided any useful information because they had been disabled. It seemed the culprit had planned every detail carefully, leaving no clues behind. However, detectives eventually discovered a key piece of evidence that had helped solve the case. An important detail was that marijuana plants were discovered at 3 crime scenes. At one location, around 200 plants were found. The police believed the cannabis was grown for sale, rather than personal use. This led to speculation about the involvement of Mexican drug traffickers. However, the amount of cannabis found was too small to suggest an attack by an entire cartel. In January 2017, a close relative of the Roden family was arrested for drug trafficking. This was considered a coincidental circumstance. Leonard Manley stated that his daughter, Dana, had no involvement with the cannabis operations. Some family members confirmed that the older brothers, Christopher and Kenneth Roden, grew marijuana, but they were unaware of any large-scale cultivation. Specialized equipment for breeding chickens for fighting, as well as cages with roosters, were found at the Roden's house. However, it soon became clear that illegal cockfighting was not the cause of the homicides either. Months went by without uncovering the true motive behind the crime. On April 13, 2017, local authorities announced they lacked sufficient evidence to make any arrests. Nevertheless, prosecutor Rob Yum stated the investigation was ongoing, suggesting they had some leads they were not yet ready to disclose. Another year had passed since the mass crime occurred, and its second memorial service went largely unnoticed. There was no coverage in the local press, and neither the sheriff or the prosecutor attended the memorial service. This led the community to believe that the investigation had stalled. However, on May 12, 2017, a special weapons and tactics team unexpectedly raided a home in Pike County, about 10 miles from the crime scene. Initially, they were searching for suspects, but it was later revealed that they were gathering evidence. Detectives also searched a house in Adams County that had once been owned by Jake Wagner, although he had sold it by then. The investigation took a dramatic turn on June 20, 2017, when the focus shifted to the Wagner family. The investigation included 26-year-old Jake, 27-year-old George III, 47-year-old George IV, and 48-year-old Angela, who lived approximately 15 miles from the victim. The Wagner family moved to Kenai, Alaska, claiming they were struggling to stay in the area. The Wagner family expressed their love for the Roden family, saying their deaths had devastated the Wagner family. The investigation indeed had a breakthrough. Authorities were seeking information from the public about the Wagner family's dealings in guns, ammunition, vehicles, and other related topics. According to the investigation, every family member was involved in the crime that occurred on November 13, 2018. The Attorney General announced that the Wagners and their sons had been arrested and charged with planning and carrying out the murder. Rita Newcomb, the 65-year-old mother of Angela and Frida Wagner, the mother of George Wagner III, had also been arrested for perjury and obstruction of justice. In February 2019, Rita Newcomb had undergone handwriting analysis to confirm her role in forging guardianship documents for Sophie. To avoid going to jail, she had entered a plea deal. As a result, the charges against Frederica Wagner were dropped in June 2019. 2 years later, on April 22, 2021, Jake had reached an agreement with the prosecution. In exchange for revealing details of the crime, all family members would receive life sentences instead of the death penalty. Jake had admitted to killing 5 of the 8 individuals and had received 23 criminal charges, including 8 felonies. The remaining charges had included theft, conspiracy, illegal possession of ammunition, forgery, interception of messages, unlawful use of property, obstruction of justice, corrupt activities, and unlawful intimate conduct with a young woman. Jake had explained that he saw eliminating Hannah May as the only way to ensure custody of his daughter. He believed that if he did not kill the entire Roden family, they would seek revenge and refuse to give custody of Sophie to him. Angela was next to face trial on September 10th. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy, aggravated robbery, and tampering with evidence. In exchange for her testimony against the other defendants, the murder charge was dropped. Angela received a sentence of 30 years in prison. The trial of George Wagner had begun on August 28, 2022. Although he denied any involvement in the crime, the prosecution presented evidence of his participation in the planning, execution, and cover-up. Ultimately, George IV was found guilty on 22 counts and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. George III's trial was scheduled for February 2024. Despite the convictions of his family members, he maintained his innocence. The once harmonious family's descent into madness was baffling, and their actions were unforgivable. The actions of the Wagner family left 3 children orphaned, depriving them of the love of their parents, relatives, and a peaceful life. One couldn't help but wonder what Sophie would be like when she grew up and realized what had happened. The case of Diana Maria Cayer Lopez Pinal. Diana Maria Cayer Lopez Pinal was born on August 12, 1998, in Madrid, to parents Diana Cristina Lopez Pinal and Juan Carlo Cayer. She has a younger sister named Valeria. Her family was wealthy and everyone in the family was very close-knit. But their lives hit a snag in February 2013 when Diana's parents divorced. However, the father still visits his daughter regularly on holidays. In the February, Diana, her mother, and her younger sister spent their vacation in the small coastal town of Epoch du Carmel, a place they had visited many times before. The town, with a population of around 10,000, is a quiet and picturesque retreat away from the hustle and bustle of city life. On the evening of August 21st, Diana told her mother that she was going to meet her friends at Valenclin Park to celebrate the Feast of the Virgin Carmen. The park was close to their vacation cottage, and Diana often walked there. Her mother gave her permission to go. Diana spent a fun evening with her friends, she unaware that it would be the last time they would see each other. At around 2:30 a.m., she said goodbye to her friends and began her home. On the way, she ran into a friend, Paso de Ariel, near her favorite pizzeria. He was the last person to see Diana that night. The next morning, August 22, 2016, became a nightmare for Diana's mother, Christina. When she realized her daughter hadn't come home from the party, she grew concerned. Diana's phone was off, which only added to her worry. Without hesitation, Christina contacted the police and reported her daughter missing. According to Christina, Diana didn't have any serious emotional or mental health issues, despite her parents' divorce when she was younger. Police opened an investigation into Diana's disappearance, looking into the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Diana's disappearance is a mystery that investigators must unravel. Their first clue came from the last message she sent to a friend in Madrid via WhatsApp. In these messages, Diana mentioned a stranger who was stalking her and shouting strange phrases, causing her to feel scared. Unfortunately, these were her last messages, after which she stopped replying to her friends' messages. During their search, they found a black hairband along the road that resembled the one Diana was wearing that night. Although this was the only evidence found at the scene of her disappearance, it gave investigators a clue to work with. Diana's friends had no information about her disappearance. Additionally, there were no CCTV cameras in the area where she was last seen. The street was dimly lit and deserted, with only a few garages and an old nightclub. Although some people reported seeing Diana get out of a car with 3 men and then get into another car, but these were not corroborated. The investigation into Diana's disappearance considered 2 primary theories. One possibility was that she was kidnapped by someone she knew. The other theory is that she was the victim of a random attack by a mentally unstable individual. Diana's mother proposed a third theory, speculating that her daughter might have been taken away by boat. New information emerged when Diana's friend and ex-boyfriend revealed that she had met a man from Morocco and purchased hashish with him. However, this detail only added to the complexity of the case. The media reported that the clothes Diana wore on the evening of her disappearance had been found, but her mother disputed it, saying it was not true. Several factors suggest that Diana did not leave voluntarily. Her credit cards and identification were still in the house. It suggests Diana's disappearance was forced, but the case remains unsolved and remains a mystery. After Diana vanished, the media reported on a fight between Diana and her mother that had occurred just days before. The press claimed that Diana had a nervous breakdown and needed medical attention. Her sister Valeria was also hospitalized with similar symptoms. To avoid conflict, the court awarded custody of Valeria to her father. The decision was made as a precaution due to the stress of Diana's disappearance. The father and Valeria left town, sparking rumors that the family was hiding something. Diana's friends revealed that running away from home was not unusual for her sisters, especially 16 years old Valeria. The family dynamics were complex, and arguments between the mother and daughters were common. This information raises a question. If Diana regularly left the house without any problems, why was her mother so worried this time? On August 31st, Diana's parents failed to appear for a press conference, where they were expected to provide an update on the investigation into their daughter's disappearance. According to the family's lawyer, her parents were too distraught to attend, as they were struggling to accept the possibility of never seeing Diana again. An article published in El Mundo on September 11th revealed new information about the family's situation. Contrary to the mother's claims that Diana did not have mental health issues, it was reported that Diana had previously gone missing for 3 days in April. During this time, she had turned off her phone and told her mother that she no longer wanted to live with her. The mother had not contacted the police, which raised concerns about her response to her daughter's behavior. Letters exchanged between Diana and her younger sister Valeria were also made public, shedding light on the emotional struggles both girls were facing. Valeria had been hospitalized multiple times in the past year, including one instance where she had to have her stomach pumped due to an overdose of prescription medication. Prosecutors have launched a new investigation into the alleged abuse of Valeria, the youngest daughter of the family, due to the lack of progress in the case of Diana's disappearance. The investigation into Diana's disappearance is currently in progress and is moving forward quickly. Forensic experts have analyzed several items belonging to Diana, including her toothbrush, comb, computer, diary, and prescription medication. Investigators have also questioned her acquaintances, including a young Moroccan man she had a brief relationship with. Unfortunately, these efforts yielded no results and police searches remained unsuccessful. The police have conducted extensive searches in the surrounding mountains, forests, rivers, and lakes. However, it appears that Diana disappeared at around 3 a.m. and the last signal from her phone was detected in the Tarragon area, 13 miles from her family's location. 72 days after her disappearance, Diana's case remains unresolved. However, police have found a hairband and a cell phone matching the description of Diana's phone. Her father has confirmed that the phone belongs to his daughter. 2 months after Diana went missing, her Facebook profile suddenly became active again. Her friends and family quickly informed the police and provided screenshots. It appeared that the Remind Password feature had been used, allowing someone to access her account without knowing her login details. This led to two possible explanations. Either Diana had forgotten her password and was trying to regain access, or someone else was attempting to break into her account. Diana's phone was a key element in the case, but it did not provide any useful information that could help explain her disappearance. The investigation finally made progress on November 10, 2006, when the driver of the car in which Diana was last seen was identified. The driver had a history of being involved in human trafficking, but this information was kept confidential to avoid jeopardizing the investigation. Initially, he had an alibi for the night of Diana's disappearance, as his wife claimed he was with her, which temporarily cleared him as a suspect. On December 25, 2017, a new piece of information came to light that greatly helped the investigation. A girl was attacked by a man who demanded her phone and threatened her with a weapon. She screamed, and a passing couple intervened, saving her from the assailant who attempted to drag her into his car. The traumatized girl quickly contacted the police, providing a description of the attacker and his vehicle's license plate number. The next day, the police arrested 41-year-old Jose Enrique Abuengue, who had a previous criminal record. Significantly, Jose Enrique was the same individual who had been detained in February 2016 on suspicion kidnapping Diana but was released due to an alibi provided by his wife. Police re-questioned Jose Enrique and his wife. Following the interrogation, the wife admitted that her initial alibi had been false, and in reality, Jose Enrique was away from their home on the night Diana disappeared and did not return until 4 a.m. Jose Enrique initially claimed that he had accidentally hit Diana with his car and, fearing discovery and imprisonment, he had dumped her body. However, he later changed his story, confessing to kidnapping and murdering her. According to Jose Enrique's new testimony, he went to the beach to look for gasoline from abandoned cars, and that's where he met Diana. The confession of Jose Enrique reveals shocking and disturbing information. He kidnapped Diana, attempted to force her into a sexual act, and ultimately strangled her. This shocking confession sheds light on the case, confirming that Diana's disappearance was a heinous crime. The disappearance of Diana Maria Cayer Lopez Pinal has been a traumatic and lengthy case for her family and those following her case. The investigation lasted for 94 days and was heavily covered by the media, with many unfounded and damaging rumors about her parents, causing them great distress and making the investigation more difficult. Despite these challenges, investigators persisted and eventually gathered enough evidence to identify the perpetrator. Diana's loved ones remember her as a beautiful, energetic young woman whose short life was unfortunately ended after an encounter with a violent man. Although Jose Enrique initially withheld information about Diana's whereabouts, he eventually revealed the location of her body, allowing her family and friends to hold a proper burial in January 2018. Her body was discovered in the well of an abandoned warehouse. The perpetrator, Jose Enrique, was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years. The case of Smith family. George Smith was born and raised in Greenwich, Connecticut. He came from a close-knit, caring family, an environment that nurtured his intelligence. His father, George Smith Sr., owned a liquor store in the town, which was not just a job, but a passion that brought him joy. George Smith pursued higher education in business at Babson College in Massachusetts and graduated in February. After completing his studies, he worked in Boston as a data mining analyst for several years. However, he realized that his true passion was helping his family in the business. In February 2005, George made the conscious decision to return home to learn the basics of business from his family's store. His goal was to one day take over the business, allowing his parents to retire and enjoy the fruits of their labor. In February 2002, at a reunion with old friends, George Smith met Jennifer. She, a Connecticut native who had just found work as an elementary school teacher, would later become his life partner. George was immediately attracted to her beautiful appearance, open personality, and strong ambition, and they quickly fell deeply in love. George's parents also welcomed Jennifer with open arms. 3 years later, in February 2005, when George was 26, they decided to tie the knot and start a new life together. Their picturesque wedding ceremony was held right on the beach at the Castle Hill in Newport, Rhode Island. Nai sa bui lu, Cap doi moi koi de ten hong tuan trang mat exi hoa kio de 12 gay trend du Thuyan Royal Caribbean. Their journey began in Barcelona on June 29th, with stops in France's Côte d'Azur and along Italy's coast. On board, George and Jennifer befriended another couple and a young man named Josh Askin from California. Josh Askin, a 20 years old with a great sense of humor, quickly became friends with George. The group had a great time together. On July 1st, when the ship docked off the Italian coast, they decided to spend the day on land. July 4th, they explored the island, wandering through the narrow streets of the old town, swimming in the crystal-clear Aegean Sea, and sampling local cuisine in quaint taverns. They were carefree and happy, enjoying each other's company and the island's beauty. The group left Mykonos with unforgettable memories and planned to continue the fun on the ship's deck that evening. After a romantic dinner, George and Jennifer rejoined their friends on the ship. The group decided to get together and enjoy a good time together, laugh and create memories of their vacation. The evening was filled with laughter and excitement. After enjoying appetizers and drinks, the newlyweds, accompanied by Josh Askin, headed to the ship Siaskino to continue the fun. George and Josh Askin spent their evening enjoying a game of craps, while Jennifer had fun playing poker at a nearby table. As the night came to a close, the newlyweds had lost a substantial amount of money, but they joked about it lightheartedly, unbothered by their losses. After the Siaskino closed, they decided to keep the party going. Later, around 2:30 a.m. on June 5, 2005, security cameras on the Greek island of Mykonos caught footage of George leaving the Siaskino, but it remains unclear whether he returned to his cabin afterwards. George Smith, a 26-year-old newlywed, is on his honeymoon with his wife Jennifer. They is having a fantastic time together, soaking up the lively atmosphere and entertainment on board. However, their enjoyable evening suddenly takes a mysterious turn. Upon investigating the incident, the ship's captain searched George's cabin, finding unusual footprints under the window, as well as evidence of a disturbance on deck. George was missing, and footprints at the scene suggested there may have been a struggle, raising doubts about George's safety. The sudden disappearance of the newlywed couple spread quickly, causing passengers on the ship to become worried and scared. The crew cordoned off Deck 7 and restricted access to cabins while they searched for George and Jennifer. After finding blood, it was presumed that they had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The senior officer took charge of the investigation and went to their stateroom to gather more information. Based on the evidence, it was suspected that George might have fallen overboard. Meanwhile, the search for they continued on the other side of the ship. By 10 a.m., Jennifer was found in the ship's spa, where she was receiving a pre-booked massage. She looked surprised and worried, claiming she had no idea where her husband was and hadn't seen him since the previous night. According to Jennifer, she woke up and found George not there, but she thought he was with friends or in another cabin. She then went to her spa appointment without giving his absence a second thought. At noon, Turkish authorities boarded the ship to investigate the disappearance of George. The captain reassured passengers that the investigation was necessary to understand what happened and hoped it would end quickly. The police began by questioning George's wife, Jennifer, who was visibly agitated and seemed to have limited information about her husband's disappearance. Jennifer told the police that she had last seen George the previous night and that Royal Caribbean staff had informed her that he may have fallen overboard. The discovery of blood on the boat's awning suggests that something terrible has happened to George. As a result, Jennifer became the main suspect due to her agitated state and apparent lack of knowledge about her husband's disappearance. The investigators then examined cabin 962, which was found to be in disarray, suggesting a possible struggle. In the bathroom, they discovered small drops of blood on the carpet and towel, as well as fingerprints on the balcony railing. Furthermore, 2 small blood stains, each approximately 2 centimeters long, were found on the bedding. The blood samples were later identified as belonging to George. George's disappearance from the cabin remains a mystery, and all evidence points to the fact that he experienced trauma before he disappeared. A chair on the balcony, positioned to allow someone to sit next to the railing, caught the investigators' attention. Marks on the railing suggested someone had indeed sat there, sparking suspicion that George might have fallen. However, the high railing and bloodstains on the boat's awning and inside the cabin hinted at a more sinister scenario: murder. Investigators have been trying to determine who George was with that night and what may have led to his disappearance. The inquiry was in its early stages, but it was already clear that the case was complex and fraught with mysteries. The Turkish authorities boarded the ship to investigate George Smith's disappearance. They began by questioning the group of friends with whom the newlyweds had spent the previous night. As the investigation remained shrouded in mystery, every detail was crucial. They reported that George and Jennifer had consumed excessive alcohol, leading to George's intoxication. They claimed to have helped him back to the cabin, put him to bed, and removed his shoes before leaving him alone. However, they were unable to account for Jennifer's whereabouts and assumed she had returned to the cabin later. Notably, Josh Askin's testimony contained inconsistencies. He alleged that Jennifer had left the group to go with a casino employee named Lloyd, contradicting the assumption that she had returned to the cabin. Josh Askin and Jennifer have deep feelings for each other, and they have both openly expressed their feelings for George. However, when reviewing the security footage, the story is different. At 3:30 a.m., the footage showed Jennifer leaving with new friends, while George stayed behind. Furthermore, data from Lloyd's key card indicated that he returned to his cabin at 3:25 a.m., a fact confirmed by his girlfriend. This new information raised more questions and led investigators to suspect that Josh Askin may have been hiding some crucial details. As the investigation continues, each new revelation added more mystery to the story. On a different part of the ship, a young man named Greg Rosenberg was enjoying a family cruise with friends, including his cousin Zach Rosenberg and close friend Rostislav Kaufman. The three men, who all held American passports despite their Russian heritage, lived in New York City. Greg Rosenberg and Jennifer had started their evening at the casino, trying their luck at poker together. After the casino closed at 2:30 a.m., they joined their friends and decided to continue the party. The group headed to the ship's disco, where they danced and drank together, enjoying each other's company. Lloyd Bota, the casino manager, was also seen having a good time with the young men. The witnesses' accounts of the nighttime activities start to conflict with one another as the group members disperse to their cabins. It was already late, and they were visibly intoxicated. According to the ship's rules, passengers who were loud and behaved inappropriately would have their drink delivery blocked. When the staff refused to serve their drunk visitors, they remembered they had a bottle of absinthe they had bought on the island of Mykonos. However, the crew had forbidden passengers from consuming their own alcohol on board. Josh Askin returned to his cabin to retrieve a special bottle of wormwood wine that he said he had purchased earlier. It was later discovered that this absinthe was exceptionally strong, with an alcohol concentration of over 70%, making it one of the strongest drinks available. George decided to help his friend by hiding the bottle of absinthe in his shorts. However, an observant janitor noticed something unusual. A group of young men, including Greg, Zach, Rostislav, Josh Askin, and George, were drinking from the bottle. This incident was added to the investigation. That evening, not only the men were intoxicated. Jennifer, at first very alert and calm, then showed signs of intoxication. She began to stagger and at one point leaned on Lloyd, the casino managed. Some thought she was trying to regain her balance, while others interpreted it as flirting. What happened next between Jennifer and George remains unclear. According to eyewitness accounts, they got into an argument, but it's unknown if they were joking or serious. At some point, Jennifer hit George, and it's unclear if it was playful or out of anger. Jennifer left the disco around 3:30 a.m., visibly intoxicated and stumbling. George stayed behind with his new friends. The staff's testimony was crucial in uncovering what happened next. Jennifer's unsteady walk caught the attention of the janitor, who had seen her and her friends drinking earlier. He helped her to the elevator and watched her turn right when she reached her deck. However, this is where the story takes a confusing turn. Her stateroom was on the left, but she headed in the opposite direction. Jennifer was found asleep in a hallway far from her room. 2 guards and a female duty officer used a wheelchair to return her to her quarters. When they arrived, the clock read 4:52 a.m., but her husband George was not there. The curtains on the balcony doors were closed tightly and remained still despite the breeze, raising questions about whether George had gone out to the balcony on his own after his friends left him in bed. Deputy Chief of Police Chit Hyman and his wife were in a neighboring cabin. They were awakened at 4 a.m. by a noise and heard loud sounds coming from George's stateroom, number 9062. Chit Hyman reported the noise to guest services and also yelled through the wall to try to quiet the disturbance. The noise stopped briefly, but then loud talking resumed for about 3 minutes. An argument on the balcony followed, during which someone said good night repeatedly, as if trying to make people leave. After that, there were sounds of furniture being moved, and finally a loud thud, like something had fallen. Chit Hyman decided to investigate a disturbance and opened the door to find 3 unidentified men. Other passengers also reported hearing a loud noise that sounded like a body hitting the boat's canopy, followed by a woman's scream. However, none of the eyewitnesses had conclusive evidence that a woman was inside the cabin at the time. According to witnesses, 4 young men entered the cabin, but only 3 of them were visible when they exited. This raised the question of whether one of them might have stayed inside to search for money from the newlywed couple, who had recently won a significant amount at the casino. The theory of a failed robbery attempt seems plausible, but there are inconsistencies in the alibis of the 3 boys, Greg, Zach, and Rostislav. They claimed to have been in another stateroom just minutes after Hyman saw the 3 unknown men. The key card records for George's stateroom confirmed that they entered it at 4:05 a.m., but there is no record of them entering the cabin again. This has led to several theories about what might have happened to George Smith. Another theory suggests that George and Jennifer's drunkenness was not simply due to excessive alcohol consumption. Although they appeared relatively sober when they left the casino at 2:30 a.m., they were unable to return to their cabin on their own by 3:30 a.m., implying possible exposure to illicit substances. This idea is supported by the testimony of other casino visitors, who reported that George and Jennifer openly discussed having large sums of money, possibly from wedding gifts or casino winnings. Estimates of their wealth varied, but all witnesses agreed it was in the tens of thousands of dollars. The fact that George wore an expensive Breitling watch and Jennifer owned a valuable engagement ring further suggested they were wealthy. It's possible that their quarters were targeted by thieves searching for the money they had been boasting about. 2 possible explanations have been proposed for the disappearance of George. The first theory suggests that the kidnapper may have injured George while trying to remove his valuable watch, resulting in bloodstains on the sheet. The second theory focuses on the effects of alcohol and hallucinogens. After discovering that the passengers had been drinking and finding footprints on the balcony, the captain suspected that an accidental fall overboard might have occurred during a scuffle. Particular attention has been paid to hallucinations caused by drinking wormwood wine, a beverage containing the active ingredient thujone. However, toxicology experts note that the concentration of thujone plays a crucial role in determining its effects. Importantly, absinthe sold in European countries today is strictly regulated, and the thujone concentration is limited to such a low level that it is incapable of causing hallucinations. The fact that the Georges actually purchased the wormwood wine in Europe makes it unlikely that it caused the hallucinations, as experts claim that the amount of alcohol required to produce such hallucinations would have to be extremely large. In reality, only black market absinthe with a much higher concentration could potentially cause hallucinations. In the investigation into George Smith's disappearance, the FBI conducted polygraph interviews with Jennifer and Lloyd Bada, and who both passed. However, Josh Askin failed the polygraph, which may suggest that he is hiding something about George's disappearance. The investigation into George's mysterious death uncovered a significant piece of evidence, a videotape featuring 3 individuals, including Russians, making jokes about an incident. The FBI agents reviewed this tape, and a particular comment made by one of the men, "We gave him a lesson in paragliding without a parachute," suggests a potential connection to George's case. During the investigation in February 2009, FBI agents interviewed Greg, Zach, Rostislav, and Josh Askin as witnesses. However, Zach Rosenberg and Josh Askin declined to provide a direct answer. Their answers remained vague, implying that they did not want to share full details of what happened. Another crucial witness was Greg Rosenberg, who was with the group of men entertaining on the night of the incident. He claimed they ordered food to their cabin that evening, providing a possible alibi for the Russian men. Nevertheless, inconsistencies were found in this statement. However, this information is incorrect. According to the ship's service records, their cabin was blocked from service that day. Staff were also specifically instructed not to serve the group that evening. Greg could not confidently say which passenger in the cabin had ordered food. Witnesses offered differing opinions on the nature of George and Jennifer's relationship, citing various observations and recollections. Greg believed it was challenging to gauge the quality of their relationship due to the group's heavy drinking. According to him, everyone in the group was extremely intoxicated, making it hard to determine the specifics of their interactions. There was a discrepancy in testimony as to whether Greg left the cabin immediately after ordering food. Josh Askin provided information that Greg left the cabin after ordering food. However, Greg denied this statement, saying that he never left. This contradiction complicated the investigation, requiring further investigation to establish the facts. In December 2019, Greg Rosenberg was murdered, and the case remains unsolved. Investigators are exploring a potential connection between his death and that of George Smith. The mysterious circumstances surrounding George Smith's appearance have raised significant questions about his background and family. As details emerged, the situation grew increasingly complicated, with the actions of his relatives following the tragedy drawing scrutiny from both the public and law enforcement. The George family persisted in seeking answers and justice regarding George's disappearance. The case was moved from the FBI's Connecticut office to the New York office. The family offered a $100,000 reward for any information that could help identify and bring to justice those responsible for the crime. They also called for a boycott of the shipping company, which they believed was trying to cover up the incident to protect its profits. The incident also strained the relationship between George's parents and his young wife, Jennifer. Her behavior was closely scrutinized, and many found her composure suspicious. She said she was acting on the orders of FBI agents, doing exactly as they told her. However, her hesitation to provide more information sparked suspicion. The George family, who were seeking truth and justice, became disheartened when Jennifer agreed to a $1 million settlement offer from the judgment company. This move appeared to them as a betrayal. They felt the Turkish authorities' investigation lacked transparency, and Jennifer seemed too hasty in accepting the offer, fueling their suspicions that she was concealing information and wasn't invested in uncovering the truth. In contrast, Jennifer says she has very few memories of what happened after 2:30 a.m. that night, unaware that the liner's staff had even found her in the corridor and escorted her back to her cabin. This satisfied with the Turkish investigation. The George family to take matters into their own hands by engaging independent forensic scientist Henry Lee to assist them. Henry Lee conducted a series of studies in the cabin and on the balcony that were not included in the official investigation. These studies could have revealed crucial information about the events surrounding George's death and potentially confirmed one of their main theories: murder or accident. According to Henry Lee, the height of the balcony makes it unclear whether George's fall was an accident or not. It is possible that a third party pushed him or that he was in a state of insanity and climbed onto a chair before falling. Henry Lee had planned to conduct an experiment to simulate a fall from the balcony, but the cruise line owner refused to allow it. George's relatives believe that this decision was made to obstruct their efforts to uncover the truth. Henry Lee also conducted investigations in the cabin, on the balcony, and on the boat, but the results of these investigations were not made public. Meanwhile, the FBI launched its own investigation, but many of its findings and discoveries were kept secret. The FBI's investigation into George Smith's disappearance focused on 4 young men who spent the night with him, as well as 3 Russians: Greg, Zach Rosenberg, and Rostislav Kaufman. However, their testimonies were inconsistent with those of other witnesses, adding to the mystery and confusion surrounding the case. Initially, Jennifer was a suspect, but she was eventually cleared of suspicion. The family then increased the amount of their lawsuit against the company and used the payout to secure the release of the investigation's results, including witness statements and other relevant information. Jennifer was left to cherish the memories of George and dedicated herself to charitable work in his honor. She later remarried, continuing to strive to make a positive impact in his memory. The FBI launched an extensive investigation into George Smith's disappearance, but it was ultimately unable to uncover the truth about his fate or recover his body. Due to lack of evidence, the case was eventually closed, and his death was officially classified as an accident. George's family continues to seek answers about the circumstances surrounding his death, and not being able to visit his grave and pay their respects is the greatest suffering for them. They remain hopeful that the truth will eventually come to light, bringing closure to the case. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.